Hello. The date today is July 2nd, 2023. Officially my 30th birthday. To commemorate making it to this milestone age of 30, I want to take a moment and reflect on my environmental issues class and the things that really stuck out most with me. To start it all off, I just want to state that the climate crisis is not just about how much CO2 companies are putting into the air. It's about all the different modules we studied and how much each of them tie into one another. It's a complicated issue with a lot of moving parts. You can't begin to address resource consumption and waste without first addressing the population problem. If the human population continues to grow like it has, we'll continue to consume and waste more. Even if people overall are wasting less, there will be more people on the planet, which will increase waste overall. The population problem isn't as simple as people choosing not to have children for the sake of the planet. It's about all people having access to birth control that prevents unexpected babies from being born. This is just one way that social issues can tie into environmental issues. If the population continues to grow, that also means that wildlife populations will continue to shrink and more species will become endangered or extinct. The more species that disappear, the more unbalanced the planet becomes. One of the most astounding facts that we learned was in the first week of class, and that was how it had taken all of human history until around 1800 for the world population to reach 1 billion people. Just 1 billion. The second billion was achieved in only 130 years, the third billion in 30 years, the fourth billion in 15 years, the fifth billion in only 13 years, and during the 20th century alone, the population in the world has grown from 1.65 billion to 6 billion. As humans, we have never experienced life on the planet with this many people, and changes happen over long periods of time. The future is uncharted waters for us because of how many lives are at stake. It's unpredictable the impact that we're going to have on the environment. And if we continue to increase our population, the unpredictability increases as well. Before humans, there wasn't really a climate crisis because things just existed and survived. This crisis is because of human actions on the planet, which is why it's up to us to fix it. It's not going to fix itself. Another big takeaway for me was the food that we eat. And the food that we eat is an individual choice, and it should stay that way. But that doesn't mean that the means of producing that food can't be more efficient and less harmful to the environment. The United States is producing 5 times the amount of red meat needed to fulfill a healthy, balanced diet. And red meat, beef, is the leading contributor of emissions in the food and agriculture industry. If we continue to have a population that grows and grows and doesn't stabilize, we'll have to build more farms, which means removing more natural resources, most of the time forests, which releases CO2 into the atmosphere and can permanently alter the existence of certain species. Deforestation releases 4 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions per year, which makes up roughly 10% of all emissions in the world. Switching your diet to a vegetarian or vegan diet can be very beneficial to the environment, but we must remember that there are places in the world where people rely on animal products to get essential nutrients and micronutrients. So doing away with meat farming or animal farming altogether is simply not an option. I learned this from Pablo Tittenell's TED Talk on feeding the world with agroecology. I also learned from our book that agroecology is basically the practice of a more traditional style of farming versus the industrialized farming of the last century. By planting a variety of crops on one farm, you can prevent erosion, which keeps the soil healthy and increases yields year to year. To quote our book, Native Americans and pioneer farmers planted beans or pumpkins between the corn rows. The beans provided nitrogen needed by the corn, the pumpkins crowded out the weeds, and both crops provided foods that nutritionally balanced corn. Another topic from our course that stood out to me was about consumption and waste, and how much waste we as human beings tend to create. Our choices of what we consume and where that comes from also have an impact on the environment. For example, buying dairy and meat products from a local farmer versus the bulk packs that come from factory farms at the supermarket help you support that local farmer and the local economy. Supporting small local farms has a positive impact on the environment. A study conducted by Iowa State University found that animals on pasture grass reduced their nitrogen runoff by 2/3 and cut erosion by more than half. In addition to supporting local farmers, you're preventing the creation of subdivisions and the destruction of more forests because we have more farmland that's being supported locally. It's incredible how much waste we create as human beings, considering the fact that waste is a human concept. In nature, there is no waste. What isn't used by one creature will eventually be used by another. I saw this pileup of waste firsthand when I worked for an online clothing retailer for 2 years. We would throw away clothes that couldn't be resold as new because the designers of the clothes didn't want their fancy brands to end up in thrift stores or to be resold on the internet. So instead of donating the clothes to people who needed it, simply because they had minor defects, even though they were still completely usable, we just ended up throwing them away. Hundreds of trash bags a year, full of perfectly good clothes, just sent to a landfill to rot and take up space. Thankfully, more and more companies are stepping up and donating unsellable returns to merchants in different countries where they can be repurposed or resold, avoiding the landfill. In the article titled, "From Living Rooms to Landfills, Some Holiday Shopping Returns Are Taking a Very Sad Path," from NPR, I quote, "Often returns will exchange hands numerous times and many end up sailing abroad." Chaturvedi suggested that as the likeliest fate of my too small blanket rolled into a bale with other returned clothes and linens sold by weight to an overseas merchant that will try to sell or maybe donate it. If not, the items will be trashed or burned. When shopping now, I try to shop local and only buy items for people that I know they will need or will use. If I can't come up with a gift idea for someone for their birthday or for the holidays, I'll just give them cash or a gift card. That way they can spend it how they please, and I'm not buying something just for it to collect dust and eventually end up in a landfill just because it was useless to them. The last big thing that I took away from this course is how much work needs to be done in terms of energy use and production. We need to shift away from the fossil fuels and energy sources that pollute the earth and move more towards renewable energy and sustainable energy. This is hard to do when there's so much money in the fossil fuels industry, and a lot of that money lines the pockets of politicians. Therefore, we must be more engaged and vocal about these issues. Attend protests, donate what you can, whether that be time or money, to causes that you care about and causes that care about renewable energy and saving the planet. One thing that I didn't know prior to this class is MG&E's renewable energy program and how they invested a large amount of time and money into building a solar field for Dane County. This gives people who don't own a home the option to use renewable energy instead of fossil fuels. I think there need to be more programs like this that provide people who can't afford to buy a house an option to still cut their footprint and be environmentally conscious. It surprised me to find out through our textbook that the planet has more than enough oil, gas, and coal that we can safely use without completely destroying the planet. But with the innovation of drilling technologies, we've found more oil and gas than we can possibly use. Just because we have the option to use this power, though, doesn't mean that we should. We need to focus on becoming more energy efficient on an individual level and on a societal level. This may mean having the government regulate how new buildings are built, how they're constructed, to ensure that they meet standards of energy efficiency. Germany is one of the leading countries in this, and they already do this to their homes. They require that every new home that's built is up to a standard of energy efficiency that they've determined. And although this increases the cost of the home initially, it saves the buyer a lot of money in the long run because their home is more energy efficient, costing them less. Some of the things that I'm doing to be proactive about my environmental consciousness is the biggest thing that I've been doing is using my bike for transportation as much as I can, just to reduce my environmental impact from driving. Not only does this reduce the amount of emissions that I'm putting out into the air because I'm not driving nearly as often unless I'm going out of town, but it also saves me a ton of money because the price of gas has gone up to $6 a gallon now versus $4 what it was last year. I've also decided to go completely vegan to reduce my environmental impact even more. Cutting dairy out of my diet reduces my carbon emissions even more than I had before by just cutting meat and fish out of it. Another thing that I'm doing to be proactive is I'm choosing not to have children, because the environmental impact of having one kid having one fewer child saves on average 60 tons of CO2 per year. Per year, 60 tons. That's a huge impact. And another thing that I've decided to do, been inspired by this course, and I've decided to go all out and follow my dream of using my skills as a photographer and videographer to pursue becoming a documentary filmmaker, to show people how beautiful our planet is and why it's worth taking care of. Some reactive things that have happened: I've started to become more conscious of things in my house that use a lot of energy, and I've been making sure that I unplug them whenever I leave the house and know I won't be using them, as well as turning off the lights when I'm not in a room and not running the heat or air conditioning unless I absolutely must. My girlfriend and I are looking into buying a house in the future, and we're going to make sure that we're able to attach solar panels to the roof to help reduce the amount of energy that we use from fossil fuels, as well as make us more energy efficient. And we'll also be making sure that all of the windows are well sealed and the entire house is well insulated to, again, increase energy efficiency. Another reactive thing that I've done is I've almost entirely stopped buying things online unless I am 100% positive that I need the item and that it's going to fit or work out, just because from this class I've learned how much stuff goes to waste that gets returned online, and I don't want to have to feel guilty about shopping online for myself or for people anymore. So instead, I'll just go buy something in person, or I'll only buy things that I know I can use or will fit. And as I said before, if I'm giving someone a gift, I'll most of the time just end up giving them cash or a gift card. That way they can decide what they want to do with it. And the last thing that I've decided to do is stop buying fast fashion and instead just thrift all the clothes that I possibly can, besides underwear and socks, which are often not even in thrift stores. I care less about what I wear and more about the longevity of the planet. And if you look hard enough in most thrift stores, you can find just about anything you need. The fashion industry is currently responsible for more annual carbon emissions than all international flights and maritime shipping combined. In addition to the environmental issues surrounding the fashion industry, there's also a moral obligation to support companies that pay and treat their workers fairly. Supporting brands that mass produce different lines of clothes every season is supporting brands that likely outsource their production to countries with low or no minimum wage. I've also decided to become more vocal about how I feel about environmental issues. Instead of being complacent when people talk about it, I bring up the facts that I've learned from this class, and I challenge them with unarguable facts, especially with my family. This is a topic that comes up all the time, and now that I have a plethora of information that I've learned from the class, I can educate them and hopefully convince them to believe that climate change is in fact real. So, yeah, happy 30th birthday to me.